At the same time, Putin completely defiant. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. He's mocking President Biden and the West over the so-called Putin inflation at the so-called Russian Davos. And his quotes here are very directly going after President Biden, even though he did not name him. He said, with U.S. officials regularly referring to the Putin's price hike, he said, quote, "They already call inflation with my name." He also suggested the current generation in Russia has the same fate as the Russian 17th century Peter the Great in terms of how he sees himself returning and strengthening territory. And he said of the Putin price hike in particular, he said, "Who is this for? Who believes this?" So if you see the speech that Putin is giving, he's mocking President Biden to his domestic population. But I think it's also worth spending a little bit of time in terms of what the rest of what he said, which is he's casting himself as Peter the Great, returning directly to Russian imperial ambitions of the days of the czars, just like in that initial speech before he launched the invasion of Ukraine. And he's painting that very much to the domestic population of Russia, who, by all accounts, currently support him. I mean, yes, there were protests in Russia. Hasn't been a protest in a long time. Let's be honest, we covered them all at the time. Sure, certainly a certain segment.
Press was very enthusiastic.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
So if there were more, I feel confident we'd be hearing about them.
Absolutely. So I think that the domestic populace has probably been ground down. The Russian opposition cannot really credibly, from what I have seen, even the Russian opposition is painted in a very difficult corner because they oppose the war, but they are unable to get around the domestic populace who is asking them, yeah, but the West wants to wage economic war on us. So they are in a very, very tricky situation. Even if Navalny, was out of prison, he would find it hard. And he's actually given interviews in the past specifically about how one of the biggest obstacles to him is that Putin is able to weaponize like Western, at least not aggression, obviously, but Western attitudes towards Russia, and how Navalny himself, by being painted as like this Western figure, finds it difficult to operate actually in Russian circles. So I think the fact that Putin is mocking us, that mocking President Biden, continues to speak as if he's the next Peter the Great, and also the actions, as I talked about in my monologue previously, you don't cut off Germany and Italy if you need the cash. Like if you really need that cash in order to keep the war going, you're not going to do anything about it.
Ruble is having its best year of any currency on the globe.
And at the same time,
they actually are in a position now where the ruble is so strong that they're worried they actually need to weaken it a little bit. They need to bring the value down because it's causing other problems for them. He made some other comments here that I think are worth highlighting as well. They show that he, after I think some genuine concern probably from him and his regime at the beginning of us launching these extraordinary sanctions, he seems to feel pretty comfortable with where they are. And like we just said, I mean, the numbers bear out that for him personally and his regime, they're good for now. He says the people behind sanctions didn't manage to take Russia by storm. The state worked professionally. Citizens were united and responsible. Gloomy predictions about the Russian economy's future didn't come true. The economic blitzkrieg against Russia never had any chance of success, and the weaponry of sanctions is a double-edged sword, which of course is a not very veiled threat. European countries dealt a serious blow to their own economy all on their own. Hard to deny that. He claims the EU will lose $400 billion from the sanctions. No idea whether that's true. The EU has lost its political sovereignty, he goes on to say. Its elites are dancing to someone else's tune, harming their own population. Europeans and European businesses' real interests are totally ignored and swept aside. So, yeah, I mean, he seems pretty cocky, frankly, about exactly how they have weathered the sanctions storm. And I was talking to Yegor, and he was telling me that in terms of the sort of Russian domestic population, after a lot of angst and anxiety and deep concern about how this was going to affect people, and I mean, it definitely has hit ordinary Russian citizens much harder than the regime. But he said at this point, the Russian war on Ukraine has somewhat faded to the background of public life. There isn't this same level of anxiety about what this is going to mean and what this is going to do. So, this is Putin basically saying, listen, I'm fine. You're not hurting me. We're good to go for the long haul, and working both through military action and through, again, much of which is unconscionable, the food blockade, whatever, but to gain leverage so that they are in a stronger position ultimately to negotiate. So the longer that this goes on, the more that there's a grinding stalemate on the battlefield or continued Russian advances on the battlefield, the more desperate that global populations become. And again, this hits the global south the hardest because our sanctions on Russian banks make it basically impossible for those nations, even if they want to be able to buy Russian grain and fertilizer. And we already had regions that were decimated by the climate crisis that were already struggling with crop yields in these years. So you have a massive food crisis in part because of Russia's unconscionable actions and then in part because of our response to the war. So that's where we are. It's a lot of misery. And not that, this would be easy to bring to a close or anything like that, but I think everybody should be interested in trying to do what they can to push this thing to an end through a negotiated settlement so that we can, so that there can be peace in Ukraine, so that it's not the whole story of inflation, but it is part of it at this point. So we can start to get prices under control. And most importantly, so we can avoid a conflict with a nuclear superpower, because that would be a good thing to do.
And domestically, well, President Biden, they're sticking to Putin's price hike. The White House Twitter feed, I just looked at it, for the last 3 days has been tweeting almost nothing but Putin's price hike. We put together a supercut just to show you how cringeworthy it is whenever they're trying to sell this to the general population. Let's take a listen.
I'm doing everything in my power to blunt Putin's gas price hike. Today's inflation report confirmed what Americans already know. Putin's price hike is hitting America hard. Let me start with the Putin price hike.
So because of the actions we've taken to address the Putin price hike, we are in a better place than we were. Putin's price hike, inflation, we expect March CPI headline inflation to be extraordinarily elevated due to Putin's price hike.
We have to address the Putin price hike, gas hike. It has, since he started amassing troops earlier this year, the price at the pump has gone up 75 cents. We're doing everything we can to minimize the Putin price hike at home.
You can barely make it up, Krystal. It's just they never end Putin's price hike over and over and over again. And, we're about to talk about this in the gas block, but who's buying this? Putin is mocking you over it. And I guess, look, we shouldn't take that as affirmation, but it just seems to be a joke both to the American people, to probably the West, obviously to our adversary, Vladimir Putin. And it's not landing, and it really just absolves President Biden of any responsibility to do anything about the inflation that we face here.
And that's the part, too, is, I think it is fair to say at this point that there is no doubt the war in Ukraine is one contributing factor to inflation, both food prices and gas prices in particular. But the way that they act like they have no control, they have no say, no agency over their own government's policy. This is one area when it comes to foreign policy where, first of all, the president has obviously a lot of bandwidth to act on his own. And second of all, where you've had an almost unanimous bipartisan consensus about our actions, our economic warfare with regard to Russia. And so they act like this is just a one-way street. And again, Putin is taking direct action in terms of the food blockade that is in and of itself wrong and damaging. But they just act like, we can't do it. We have nothing to do with this. We can't do anything about it. When in fact, they've taken extraordinary action. We continue to, I think we just sent our 12th package of arms. So we are directly involved in this conflict. So to pretend Putin's price hike, nothing we can do, is also extraordinarily disingenuous.
Yeah.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.